Hey everybody, this is Unit 6, Lecture 3, Development in Infancy and Childhood. This is the big one of this unit. Take a look at all of these people and all of the things that go with all of the people. You absolutely need to be taking good notes. If you thought that last lecture was kind of light and easy, you're right, but that's because this one is gonna make up for it. By the time we talk about this in class, we should be repeating and rehearsing the information. You should not be hearing it for the first time. So I really hope that you are watching this before we talk about it in class, because this one is going to require the most repetition, the most rehearsal, the most studying, the most everything. Okay, here we go. Physical development. This is actually the really short little piece of the development of infants and children. And we call physical development maturation. And this is the biological growth process uninfluenced by experience. So in other words, what your body naturally does no matter what. Okay. The sequence of motor skills is considered universal. All babies will roll over, crawl, and walk in that order unless they simply don't do one of those things at all, namely crawling. Some babies skip it. And while that is universal, the timing is individualistic. And so, yes, we can ballpark about when these things happen, but it is still different child to child. Fine motor skills, just two types of movement and motor skills that are developed are either fine motor skills or gross motor skills. The way to remember them is that fine motor skills do like these fine, small little movements like fingers, toes, wrists, lips, and tongue, all those like fine, detailed, careful movements. And then gross motor skills don't mean like, oh, ew, gross, not like that, but like gross as in large. Bigger movements that use your arms, your legs, your torso, and your feet. Okay, so they develop both of them. All humans do. I was gonna say all human babies. Yes, humans. Well, that's it for physical development of infants and children and what we need to know. We need to devote a ton of time to cognitive development. Okay, so how children and infants develop their minds, their theories, their thoughts, their memories, and so on. The biggest name in this lecture, in this unit, in all of psychology, according to Time magazine, one of the 20th century's top 20 most influential scientists and thinkers, the last century's greatest psychologist, that is quite the accolades, is Jean Piaget. So Piaget focused on theories involving the development of children, obviously. That's why we're talking about him here. And he claimed that children developed in stages as they matured and gained experiences, and that this was a discontinuous theory. Discontinuous theory meaning he focused on the order and sequence of stages, and basically that a child would develop strictly within those stages. Maybe not at the same speed, but one would not proceed to the next stage until that previous stage was completed. So we put a lot of emphasis into this. Many people have described his theory that he believed children were like little scientists that would explore the world, manipulate the world, and learn through experiences. One critique, though, is that he underestimated children's natural abilities and possible gifts to move a little bit faster through some of the stages, or even to be trained and taught to kind of speed through a given stage. But there has been a lot of research done on Piaget's theories, and most of that research confirms at least the order of his stages. Piaget focused a lot of his research into the development of schemas and concepts. And so we know that schemas are frameworks or mental molds into which we pour our experiences. So we encounter new information and we determine, does this fit into something I already know, or is this something brand new? And so Piaget determined that children shape new information in two different ways. They either assimilate information or they accommodate new information. To assimilate information means fitting new information into an existing schema. So if you encounter, you're a child, and you encounter a zebra, you are likely to fit that into your existing schema of a horse, because that seems to make sense. It seems to fit the same characteristics. You assimilate it. This is a little bit of an easier thing to do. Got it. Okay. But To accommodate this new information means to do something a little bit more mature, a little bit more cognitively advanced, and that's to change your understanding of an existing schema to include new information. Like, hey, my schema of horses needs to just stay that way, and maybe I need to create an entirely new schema or concept, an entirely new schema that would fit into a new concept that I haven't encountered before. Piaget said that together, assimilation and accommodation lead to adaptation of new information. So finding ways to adapt to these experiences to fit it into your thought. With the idea of schemas and concepts in mind, Piaget developed his 4 stages of cognitive development. The first one is sensorimotor, preoperational, concrete operational, and formal operational. And while I do provide you with some of this information on your notes, it's really important that you fill in some of the other descriptions, because you do need to be able to identify each of these 4 stages based on the behavior of the children in an example. For example, how old do you think Miss Russ is when she thought it'd be super cool to have a birthday party where all of her friends made awesome 80s style shirts, because it was the 80s. Okay, first stage, sensorimotor. This occurs between 0 and 2 years old. Yes, we will watch this video in class 1. Some of the characteristics is that at this stage, a child is experiencing the world with their 5 senses: looking, hearing, touching, melting, and grasping to understand new information. They do not develop object permanence until later in this stage at 9 months. Which is the idea that objects and people exist even if they are out of sight. So if you think about a child laughing at peekaboo, it is because they literally think that if you are out of sight, you are gone. Oops, sorry about that. They also continue to experience stranger anxiety until they're about 8 months old. And this is a fear of strangers. It is because babies only have schemas for familiar faces, and they cannot assimilate other faces and don't understand how they are the same or different. Be careful with this, just understanding this term, because it does not mean stranger danger. Stranger anxiety is a natural thing that babies feel when they can't recognize a face, not when they're being taught to be careful around strangers. The pre-operational stage takes place roughly between the ages of 2 and 7. Here, children are able to start representing things with words, images, and symbolic thinking. They have an imagination and engage in pretend play, but they also tend to be egocentric, so they can't perceive things from another's point of view. This is not the same as selfishness. This is not saying that they are egotistical, though I suppose young children can be. What this is getting at is, if you imagine a child playing hide and seek, a small child, they might just turn their back on you and say, okay, I'm hiding. Because if they can't see you, they're only taking it from their own point of view. They're only cognitively able to understand the situation from their point of view. So if they can't see you, you can't see them, and therefore they must be hiding. It's a little bit of a tricky concept, but it's also kind of interesting to think about. They also, in this stage, lack the idea of conservation. And this is not too difficult to understand. It's the idea that quantity is the same even if shape or other properties change. So in this picture, in this video, which we'll see in class, pouring the same amount of liquid into a short, wide glass or a tall, skinny glass, and the child will think that they are different quantities. So at this age, between 2 and 7, a child is not capable of recognizing the physical differences of shape and size. Next is the concrete operational stage between 7 and 12, and this is the ability to think in a more logical manner, understand analogies, complete rational interpretations, and transform math functions. So understanding the concept that 4 plus 8 equals 12, but then being advanced of a thinker enough to understand that 12 minus 4 equals 8. They do master conservation at this point, so the manipulation of physical properties of items, and they tend to learn best with hands-on experiences. And then the 4th and final stage is the formal operational stage. That is the stage that you and I are in, possibly. What it means is we are capable of abstract reasoning. We approach problems systematically, ruling out possibilities along the way. We are able to apply one concept to another. We have a sense of moral reasoning, ethical, and we can explore ethical issues a little bit more. So this is a lot of big fancy words. The idea here is that adolescents, young adults, and adults are able to reason hypothetically and think through something even if it's not hands-on or really there. We can ponder and deduce if-then statements. If I take my can of LaCroix and pour it on my head, I will get wet and sticky. If I punch my friend in the shoulder, they say, ow, they might be mad at me. So being able to have those sorts of thoughts. It is thought to emerge during the teenage years, yet some research has shown that not everyone fully masters this stage, and that approximately only 60% of adults are capable of this level of critical thinking. Phew! You made it through the Piaget section here. Now we're going to talk about Vygotsky. And Vygotsky, I won't say was a rival, but had kind of an opposite theory on cognitive development for children. So Piaget emphasized how a child's mind grows through interaction with the physical environment. Vygotsky was more of a social learning kind of guy, and he believed that a child's mind feeds on social interactions and experiences, and his theory was continuous. So it was gradual. A child went from stage to stage, and there was not necessarily a certain milestone that marked off one or the other. And he believed that children were little apprentices that would learn best not through the experiences in the world, but from other people or mentors, parents, teachers, caregivers, and so on. Vygotsky's theory was based on this concept of a zone of proximal development. And he claimed that this was the time where a child would learn the best and they would be developmentally ready for a skill. So that sweet spot when a skill is challenging enough, but not so much so that a kid wants to quit and not even try. So between too easy and too hard. In other words, they can do it with help, and that help would be considered scaffolding. And that's where a mentor, a parent, a teacher would come into play. So someone else would provide a framework or other hints, prompts, and things like that to help a child learn something, help them develop higher levels of thinking until they could do a skill on their own and then get the next challenge. This is a theory that teachers are still taught today, as I can speak to experience that this is what we aim to achieve with each and every one of you. Okay, the last type of development is social development. And this is really based off of this idea of attachment. Attachment is the cornerstone of social development of children and infants. And it is the positive emotional bond that develops between a child and a caregiver. This is not imprinting, which maybe you're familiar with, and it's something that many birds do, which is instinctively form an attachment to the first moving thing seen after birth. So we'll take a little look at this in class, but Konrad Lorenz is a birdologist who named and coined this type of attachment, but this is not what humans do. Human children actually develop their attachment based on the parenting style. It is also influenced by genetics and the child's temperament, so that it's not exclusively up to parents, but it's significantly influenced by parents. Most of what we know about attachment and parenting styles stems from two very well-known research studies. The first one was done by Harlow in the 1950s at the University of Wisconsin. And what he did is he took infant monkeys away from their mother at birth, which is sad, yes, and awful, yes. And he put them in a cage with two mother options. One is, let me get my mouse going. One was a wire mother that only provided milk, and another was a cloth mother that was warm and cuddly but did not offer milk. And Harlow was really trying to see, do babies become attached to their parents because they offer food? And what he found was that the baby monkey was more clingy to the cloth monkey mother and only occasionally went to the wire monkey to nurse. And what that showed us And yes, we'll look at this in class, but what that showed us is it showed us that attachment was about comfort and not food. In other words, the implications of Harlow's research is that human attachment grows as caregivers respond to baby's signals. So when a baby is crying, smiling, reaching for their caregiver, the more that the human responds and provides what the baby needs, the more secure that baby will feel. And so that's a good lesson for all of us to know, really, if we ever are in charge of caring for someone else, that it's important to be responsive so that person feels secured, safe, loved, and then, of course, cared for in terms of food as well, but it's not purely a survival thing. The second major research study on social development and attachment was by a researcher named Mary Ainsworth, and she developed the strange situation experiment. I recommend you listen and think and then decide how you want to summarize this on your paper. What she did is she was developing a test to measure the level of attachment. So at this point from Harlow, we kind of have this definition of attachment, but how do you identify the different types? Well, what she would do is she would have a mother and a child enter an unfamiliar room. The mom would let the child explore while she was nearby, and then at some point, after a short amount of time, an adult stranger would come in and the mother would leave. It's important to note at this point that every child does get at least a little bit upset when the mother leaves, no matter what. I'll come back to that. The mom would then return a short while later as that stranger would just leave. So what Ainsworth was really looking at was not whether or not the child cried when the mother left. They all did that. It's about how they responded to the mom when she returned. So let's look at the results. What she found is that a child who was securely attached had that trusting relationship between, when there was a trusting relationship between mother and child, the mom was more of a home base. So the child would explore the room, felt comfortable returning to her here and there, but would be comfortable seeing what else was out there. And there was a relaxed, attentive, caregiving relationship between mother and child. On the other hand, in cases of an insecure attachment relationship, the child had no desire to explore the room and no trust that their caregiver would be responsive to them. And this broke down into two categories as well. There was avoidant insecure attachment and ambivalent insecure attachment. If it was an avoidant insecure attachment, the child typically didn't cry when the mom left the room and then avoided her when she returns. That kind of gave an indication that the child didn't expect that the mother would be would be responsive in any sort of way to their needs. In the category of ambivalent, the child would have anxiety when the mom is in the room, would be upset when the mom left the room, and would be upset when she returned, possibly even hitting or kicking her. Basically, again, the child had no trust in how the mother would respond and kind of didn't know how to behave themselves. The bottom line in Ainsworth findings is that securely attached children are more socially and emotionally well adjusted, and they typically were seen as more cooperative, capable, and playful. So probably the type of relationship a parent should aim to develop with their child. And that brings us to our last topic of this lecture, which is parenting styles. One more psychologist for you, Diana Baumrind. She developed this 4-part framework to categorize parenting styles. The first style is the authoritarian style. This type of parent would be rigid, demand complete obedience of their children, hold very strict standards, discourage any sort of questioning of their judgment or disagreement. Typically, the resulting child would be obedient, but might also be unsociable, unfriendly, and withdrawn, and might even become rebellious once they finally get some level of freedom later in life. A permissive parent is often relaxed but provides inconsistent direction. While they seem nice, they require very little of the child, and the child kind of doesn't know how to interact with authorities or even other children and peers. These children tend to be immature, moody, overly dependent, and have low self-esteem, and potentially even perform poorly in school because they have problems with authority and don't know how to respond to them. An authoritative parent is someone who is firm, sets limits and goals for their children, yet also explains and uses reasoning to justify the rules that they set and the goals that they help form. The children are often allowed some role in making decisions and setting these goals, which encourages them to become independent. They often result in being likable, self-reliant, and cooperative. An uninvolved parent shows, just like it sounds, shows very little interest in their child, and become emotionally detached. They view parenting as providing food, clothing, and shelter for their children and not much more. In extreme forms, an uninvolved parent would be guilty of neglect, and then the children often feel unloved and emotionally detached, possibly even to the point where they have lack self-control, have low self-esteem, and are less competent than their peers. So I hope that you have concluded just by listening that an authoritative parenting style tends to result in children who are the most happy, capable, and successful.